Quote, Ontario can reduce violence involving youth by adopting a more coordinated, more comprehensive, and more community-focused approach. That was the thrust of recommendations delivered 10 years ago by the review of the Roots of Youth Violence report, written for the provincial government of the day by former Ontario Chief Justice Roy McMurtry and former Speaker of the Legislature Alvin Curling. A decade later, with a record number of homicides in Ontario's capital city and shocking instances of violence in an elite private school in this city, what will it take to do better by young people at risk? Let us ask the aforementioned Alvin Curling, who was also Ontario's first ever Black Cabinet Minister. Former Toronto City Councillor John Burnside, who's also a former police officer. Annette Bailey, Associate Professor at Ryerson University's Daphne Cockwell School of Nursing. Renelle Bruder, Youth Advocate and founder of the RISE Initiative, a grassroots effort for at-risk youth. And Jennifer Pagliaro. Everybody calls her J-Pags. She's the City Hall reporter for the Toronto Star, and we're very happy to welcome all of you here to TVO tonight for an important and timely conversation. I want to start with you, Mr. Speaker. Dalton McGuinty, 10 years ago, asked you to do a report on the roots of youth violence. You and Roy McMurtry went out and did your report. Give us the gist of what you were recommending a decade ago.
Let me go back into the cranium now and find out all the things that we recommended, actually. It's one of the things that we said to them, especially to the government, that this situation is widespread. And we must do something about youth violence. And we must also put an aligned program in place by all the other respective governments in order to address the concerns of our youth and where they're going, you see. And but we also said, Ontario, you're at a crossroad. You must act now. We put forward about 10 recommendations, and very much the emphasis wasn't on the recommendations as much as the advice. We have given them more advice about what to be done, and to say to them, move forward with that. One of the things, two things that come to mind very readily is when we talk about mental health. And they were sort of taken aback by the fact that mental health, yes, we said it's the only place that we will put any sort of money in place for that. And when I say we, I'm talking about Roy McMurtry, a remarkable individual who would bring a lot of credibility to this report. The reason for that is what his backgrounds were. As a Solicitor General, Attorney General, Ambassador, and also, so therefore, he himself commanded that respect that laws have to be changed in order to move forward itself.
Well, you two were a kind of a dynamic duo, because you were a former Liberal cabinet minister, he was a former Tory cabinet minister,
yes.
But you came together and found a consensus. What was it that Dalton McGuinty was kind of asking for advice on?
I think, let me just deal with that part of it all.
Sure.
He's white, I'm black. He's conservative, I'm liberal. He was an ambassador, I was an ambassador. He was a cabinet minister, and I was a cabinet minister. So therefore, the synergy there was very live, and he's extremely grassroots itself. Mm-hmm. So therefore, what he was looking for is what is happening out there? What are the young people saying? What is causing this roots of violence that the youth were involved with, and why?
And what were you seeing at the time?
And the basic question was, that why would a 12-year-old take up a gun and shoot another 12-year-old?
Exactly.
The basic question. When we dig into that, we found a remarkable amount of things as we go across the province itself, which took us almost nearly 2 years. And that was the report, The Roots of Youth Violence. And today, and I think why it is the synergy is so live and strong is that it was written in a form that people could understand it. And they could commit themselves right through the process. And it's not one of those things that will happen overnight. It's almost like driving with your children. Steve, they said to you, are we there yet, Dad? Are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. We're far from being there, if what there is all about.
Well, let's find out how much further we still have to go. And Annette, maybe I can bring you into the conversation at this point. Mm-hmm. I want to pick up on the former speaker's last question. What prompts a 12-year-old child to shoot another one?
Well, for years, scholars and advocates alike have theorized and documented that social issues impact on violence. And these social issues, poverty being one of them, and probably the most significant of all the determinants of health, truancy, neighborhood effects, fatherless homes, social injustice. These are just a few of the social issues that interact to impact on violence. What's interesting, though, is in my research with racialized youth in particular, trying to understand the nature and complexities of gun violence and why they're involved in gun violence, and particularly youth who have lost family members and multiple friends to gun violence. What my research is showing is that there is no doubt that these issues do compound, interlock, intersect in their everyday experiences. But what is significant is that the point of interaction for these youth is trauma. Trauma is what implicate violence more so than all the other issues. So while these other issues interact, they don't have a direct link to different forms of violence, including gun violence.
How are you defining trauma?
Trauma is different from stress. Trauma is long-term. It has greater physiological and psychological impact. Trauma debilitates people's capacities. So it shifts their paradigm, shifts their way of seeing themselves and viewing the world. And so trauma for many of these young people come from many different interactions that they have. Number one, for racialized youth, is the loss of friends and family members to gun violence. Many of the remaining youth in the families that are impacted by gun violence they've lost their older siblings. They've also, at the same time, lose sometimes up to 30 friends. Like one youth can lose up to 30 friends to gun violence. That's a complete erosion of their social network. And we know for young people how important their social network is.
Okay, that takes me over here. Renelle, I want you to tell us about the RISE initiative. What is that?
Yes, so the RISE initiative is a grassroots initiative to target at-risk youth using a holistic approach of health and wellness. And so for me, I was a former at-risk youth. So when I was on the streets and I was the victim of sexual exploitation and dealt with poverty and many of the things that young people face, I found that having that foundation of health and wellness and having something to anchor myself was a great way to help me to sort of turn my life around, be able to achieve the things I wanted to do, and eventually be able to have success both academically and professionally. And so with the RISE, it's a series of interactive workshops where I work with young people. We discuss things about nutrition, fitness, well-being. So we'll talk about things about mindfulness, deep breathing, creating a self-care plan.
Don't take this the wrong way, but why would anybody who is, quote unquote, at risk, who leads a bit of a tough life, who leads a life maybe in the streets, why do they give a damn about talking about mindfulness and a holistic approach to life and all of that?
Yes, no, so they don't, and that's the point. So when I come in and I meet them, a lot of times they're very apprehensive and, okay, what is she doing? What is she talking about? But then I share my story with them and I share my experiences. And my experiences are still rooted, and I work with a lot of young men who are former gang members or currently in gangs. And it's the same, and much to what you were speaking about, it's that same trauma. So we all come from a place of trauma.
Did you?
Yes, I did. We all come from a place of pain. And when you're in that place and when you're young, you're seeking for something, some sense of belonging, some sense of support, and gangs and pimps and whoever it might be, they offer you that surrogate family type of situation that a lot of young people are looking for.
Gotcha. Let's hear from the Chief of Police on this, shall we? Sheldon, if you would, let's play the clip of Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders commenting on the really unacceptable rise in gun violence in Ontario's capital city over the past year. Please.
I think the general public is saying, look, I either feel safe or I don't feel safe. What are you going to do about it? And right now, a large number of people are going, I'm not too sure whether or not Toronto is as safe as it was before. I can tell you that it is safe. It is still one of the safest urban cities in North America. However, when we look at who is causing the violence, especially the gunplay, it is street gangs. So those men that are involved in a high-risk lifestyle, who have decided to commit to the high-risk lifestyle, are the ones that are getting killed the vast majority of times. We have to look at the root cause of that. We have to work in a much broader sense of what we need to do to resolve it.
John Burnside, couple of follow-ups from that. Would you agree with the chief that this city, per capita, essentially is a safe place to live?
I would agree, but I would also add, depends where you live.
Right.
And I think that's the kicker. If you live in Lawrence Heights, not necessarily so safe. If you live in Lawrence Park, yes, it's very safe. And I think that's one of the big challenges we face as a city, is that if something happens in Lawrence Heights, not necessarily as important to everyone as if it happens in Lawrence Park.
What, in your experience, does a gang offer that at-risk youth are not getting elsewhere in their life, and therefore it seems to be an attractive alternative?
I would say, as has been mentioned, a sense of belonging and respect. Those are the two things that I think lure youth to gangs.
Even at 14, 15 years old, respect is important.
Absolutely, especially boys that are going through puberty. And I can't speak as someone who grew up in a very middle-class neighborhood and who had all the advantages of that. I can't necessarily speak to all aspects of what lures somebody into a gang, but I can certainly say that that's a time in one's life where you're very unsure of yourself, and to have that group, whether it's the hockey team or the gang, that really does give you a sense of belonging and a sense of importance.
Jennifer, you cover City Hall, so let's start with you by finding out what City Hall has been up to in terms of addressing what we've been talking about tonight.
So after Mr. Curling and Mr. McMurtry wrote this report for their province, there was an intervening period where not very much happened. There wasn't really any action, there wasn't any funding, and then a motion was made by a city councillor that created what we now call the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy. Essentially, city staff wrote a strategy, an actual action plan that's really founded in the Roots of Youth Violence report. The point was to look at addressing some of the evidence that was found. And what's important about the report, I think, is that it really touched on, what youth were experiencing. It talked to youth directly. It looked at all of the available research and sort of compounded it all together. And it became sort of a touchstone for, this is what we know is happening, and here is what we can do about it. So council put together this plan. They voted to approve it unanimously in February 2014. But since then, what I've discovered is that it's been severely underfunded. The strategy looks at trying to engage what they call most vulnerable persons. So these are youth aged 13 to 29 who are most susceptible to this life of violence. But it looks at addressing them, where they live, which is what we've been talking about, by helping them with employment, with all kinds of life skills. There's also a program that I recently learned about that is dealing with mental health and trauma with young people by matching them up with other young mentors so they can discuss that type of trauma openly and hopefully get help and learn to address it and how that's impacting them in their daily life. But we are talking about a strategy that needs around $15 million worth of funding annually, and right now it gets less than $500,000.
You need $15 million, it gets $500,000. That's not doing the job, is it?
It's a pretty big gap.
But when we reduce it, let me just go back to what the chief had said about either you're safe or you're not safe. Depends on who he's speaking about. The young man who goes out, the 12-year-old outside there, and been harassed by the police, or he goes home and have a terrible environment of a home condition that the tenants and the landlords are not getting on, and he has a mental issue. Is it safe? So when the police reduce it down to, will I get shot or not get shot? If we really reduce it down to a very narrow base itself, we have to talk about, is a city safe to live in for good accommodation, the struggles of mental health, a space to play, and all that. Those things have to be addressed. The others will just take care of itself.
Are they being addressed?
Not adequately. Because again, the point is why they're not, I think, adequately, because we have 3 parents who are looking after this, supposed to be, or maybe 4. We talk about the levels of government, the municipality, the province, the feds, and the big corporations who actually have a strong investment into all of this itself. When we can have a coordinated, strategic approach in all of this, then we can start moving forward, because everyone is invested into this and we'll have to play a role. Now the police over there are going to catch them, put them in jail, and then as a matter of fact, when we finish it, all of this type of situation, that individual has a criminal record and he continues that kind of a life on and on and on. So I would like to maybe have a chat with the chief at one time, or talk about, is this a safe city?
Social media. Talk to us about the impact that has.
We know that the way that youth are interacting now is a lot different than even when Mr. Curling's report was written. And it plays into this idea of respect and your relationship with other people in your social circle. And we've seen that the kind of beefs that used to play out on a street level are now playing out online, and they often escalate and can escalate to real life physical violence. And talking to youth workers who are really trying to reach these youth, they're really struggling with this because it's difficult to monitor what's happening in the online sphere. You know, you're talking about Snapchat messages going back and forth, things as simple as a gold chain being stolen from one rapper and someone filming a music video wearing it in a rival territory and not knowing how to address that with young people, that what they say to one another on the street has an impact, but when you put up a video like that, it gets, you know, thousands. In this case, it got tens of thousands of views. That created a situation that spiraled out of control, and we see that happening in little pockets all over the city.
Do you see that in your experience? People getting killed over tweets and Snapchat
Yes.
messages and that kind of thing? You do?
Yes, because I mean that's sort of, I guess, my generation and the generation now. That's how we communicate. That's how we engage. And so, like you were saying, when someone posts something, it's a disrespect to somebody. It's sometimes they'll go into their hood and they'll do something, and the retaliation many times is murder. It's you have to kill somebody. So it's. And when I talk to young people, I still think sometimes they don't necessarily understand the consequences of this behavior. So it's still almost like they're playing a game, but they don't understand that this game has real life consequences.
Shall we bring up these statistics now? Sheldon, help us out with this, please. These are the latest homicide stats and the numbers on the numbers of shootings in the city. This is as of November 26th of this year, and this does include the Yonge Street van attack and the Danforth shooting. And we see homicides. You see what the average is. The capital city is well above average right now in terms of homicides in the city this year. And if we flip to the next chart and we go to shootings, you can see again, we're above average, not as high yet as it was in 2016, but of course the year is not over yet. And we should also say this is not just a problem in Toronto. There are stats that say Canada's homicide rate last year was the highest it's been in a decade because of a spike in gang violence and a spike in gang shootings. John, you see these numbers. What pops out to you on those numbers?
Well, what pops out to me is actually are the number of shootings. And we like to look at the number of deaths, which is obviously important, but I don't think it really tells the full story, which is that since the year of the gun, 2005, the number of shootings have actually been increasing steadily. So while the number of deaths looks like a bit of an anomaly, the trend has been upward, and I think it's our inability to deal with that that's obviously a huge issue. And Mr. Curling's report, when I read it this week, it could have been written yesterday, except for the social media bit that was missing. It was so relevant and touched on every point, in my opinion, that we're facing today that we're facing 10 years ago.
If you do the math, it's about a shooting every day. Is that just the new normal for Toronto and we're going to have to accept that?
Well, I don't think we have to accept it. Has it become the new normal? Unfortunately, it would seem to be that way. If you look at a couple of years ago, I think it said there were about 350 shootings.
Yeah.
So we're in that range, but it has been going up. The question is, how do we bring it back down? And I think that's what's the vexing issue.
Well, Annette, do we have to accept this as the new normal?
Well, I don't think it's. When I look at the graph across the years, I don't necessarily see that there's a significant spike in gun violence in Toronto. In fact, in 2016, we had more shootings than we have this year. And I understand that if we're looking at the numbers, it's only about 47 deaths right now with 30-something shootings, 300 and something shootings. But this is not something new. This is not an emerging trend. It's what's been happening in Toronto for many, many years. The issue is that the shootings are becoming more public. They're taking place in public spaces. So we're seeing that they're happening more, let's say on the Danforth shooting. If you remember back in 2012, the Eaton Center shooting, the Young and Dundas shooting. So this has been happening in marginalized, disadvantaged, prioritized neighborhoods for many, many years. And we've seen cumulatively over the years, hundreds of particularly racialized youth die to gun violence. Now there's a media frenzy because it's becoming more public.
It's moved into more public places.
It's moved into more public spaces. So the public think, oh my goodness, there's a spike, there's an increase in gun violence. But the numbers are not really saying that if you really track backwards. Statistic Canada has shown that in urbanized or cities, urban cities, there's been cumulatively in the urbanized cities in Canada an increase. It says there's about an 80% increase. But if we're just looking at Toronto, there's a slight amount in the death that has taken place this year, but not in the amount of shootings per se. So you know, you have to start to think about what messages are being sent through the media to let people get this idea that now we have to do something because gun violence is a problem.
Well, we got somebody in the
But
media.
it's been a problem
We got somebody
for
in the
many
media.
years.
I hear you, but we got somebody in the media right beside you.
Yeah.
Do you want to pick up the story?
I think what Annette's saying is really important. I think when you back out and look at a 10-year or 20-year trend, you see what criminologists really call a peaks and valleys situation. And the only guaranteed thing that I've ever experienced with gun violence is that if there is a peak, there will eventually be a valley and we will return to a peak again. And I think that's because we still aren't doing something adequate about these root causes of youth violence. You know, talking to youth workers and social workers, they say all the time, you know, we tell people there's going to be another summer of the gun. It's coming back. We're coming back around again, but yet they still can't get adequate funding. They can't get resources or support from the government. When I look at the homicide numbers, I think about the more than 140 youth that have been killed since the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy was approved by council in 2014. And when you do the math, it's one youth every 12 days on average. And when you start to think about the impact that has on those communities and the trauma that we've been talking about, you have to wonder why there isn't a sustainable, equitable solution.
You worked in politics. Why has politics not been able to respond adequately to this?
Because I see, again, we're going down one road itself. You notice we talk about youth violence and we talk about guns. And then we only address guns. Violence is violence itself. Whether you use a gun or a knife or what have you, we have to address the root cause of youth violence itself. So emotionally, of course, not picking on the press or so, or the media, it's nice to say the gun, it's all this emotional explosion that kill, but there are lots of other young people are dying in a different way every day. So we have to address youth violence itself. And we have to be quite careful. And you saw the chief said the same thing about gun violence, and some of us, we commented about gun violence. We talk about youth violence. In politics, we do that. We walk into that same stuff. The politicians, we talk about the emotional stuff because that's attract attention onto themselves. We will never address it unless we decide overall in a comprehensive, strategic way.
But attention can be good, right? I mean, one thing the media can do is bring attention to a crisis, which is what's happening.
That's right.
But then it's, of course, incumbent upon decision makers to take it to the next level and make something happen. Is that happening?
And that's exactly, that's why I'm saying that so many partners are in this, supposed to be partners, and one want to outstrip the other. The municipality would say that, and they would say how much money I've spent. The mayor may say how much money I've spent, and sometimes we even draw the line of Toronto, beyond the Toronto, and include it in the statistics. In Brampton or what have you, it's happening, but we still would throw it in there, so it's emotional. But here's one mayor is saying, I'm addressing it. What happened to my other partners? What happened to the federal people? What happened to the provincial people? And when you take away a certain sort of a structure in order to assist that and then destroy it or collapse it, it makes it worse. And some of the issues we have to watch. what are the present government doing today to make sure they don't undermine the strategy put in place?
Well, you were once a Liberal cabinet minister. We've got some tape here of another former Liberal cabinet minister. This is Michael Bryant, who once upon a time was the Attorney General in the province. Here's a clip of him on the effect that jobs might have in terms of steering kids away from gangs. Sheldon, if you would.
I think a job is for sure the best way to get a young person away from a gang and onto a different life, for sure. Most of the kids, when I say kids, I include young adults who are in gangs, are running away from themselves and running away from their lives, and they are living in chaos, and they are chronically immature, and there may be addictions as well. A job is a far better blueprint for their life than the one that they've undertaken by joining a gang because they needed to join something.
Best social program around, as Brian Mulroney used to say.
Right. That's right.
Do you agree with that jobs can solve this?
Not jobs only, yeah. So I do think jobs are important, and that youth need to have opportunities to be able to have meaningful employment. But I think there needs to be many social services. So we need better access to mental health care services. They need after-school programming. They need to have healthy food to eat and places to play sports or arts and creativity and mentors. And I think just saying they need to get jobs. Well, just getting a job is not that easy when you've been in a gang, you've been in the streets, and you don't have any work experience, so you don't have anything to put in your resume, and you don't even know how to put together a resume. So you need to learn employability skills, professionalism, communication. So I think that's kind of a simplistic way of answering it, but I do agree you need to have jobs, but that's one of many other things.
I hear you, Renelle, but there's going to be people watching this right now who are going to say, you know what? The kid who lives down the street from me doesn't have a community center to go to after school. They may not be eating the best food. They may not have the healthiest lifestyle. They may not have a mentor. They may not have a place to go pick up hockey or pick up basketball after school. But that kid's not going out killing anybody. There seems to be a difference between those kids who don't have all those things and those kids who don't have all those things and yet still go out and commit crimes. What's the diff?
Well, you don't have those social services, and then that's compounded with the trauma, that's compounded with PTSD, that's compounded with growing up in an environment where you're neglected, whether that's in the home because maybe your parents are too busy and they're not able to provide for you, that's in the school system where the teachers dismiss you as a delinquent, and so you're further being isolated, and then it's in the community. So I think, and it's particularly, I think, when you're talking about racialized young men, you see that. You see the stigma, you see what they're dealing with. And so when you put all those things together, this is the outcome that you get.
John, what's your reaction to these former Attorney General's comments?
Well, if we were to accept that poverty is the leading cause of youth violence, then it would follow that employment would be one of the cures. I actually see the issue as an employment issue, but I see it as far more grave. If you're a youth or young adult and you don't have an education, what job are you getting in our society now? And I've been talking about this for 10 years. We just heard 3 days ago, I should say, GM closing their plants. Yeah. And it used to be that you could get into the middle class by working at Nabisco or GM or Goodyear or take your pick. But now you almost have to have a university or college education. And what I think has been missing in a lot of government policy has been that emphasis on education. I applaud the Wynne government for making it available, university and college, to low-income families. But I think for free, yeah. But we need to put more emphasis on the value of that. When I grew up, that's all my parents told me. You got to get an education. You got to get an education. If you don't have someone in your family, a parent, primarily, reinforcing that, then we can have all the youth programs we want, but working at a $14 minimum wage job is probably not what youth are looking for.
I don't think somebody who makes her living at Ryerson University is going to argue against education. But do you think education can solve 85% of this problem?
I think education is a significant tool in the progression and aspiration of our youth. There's no doubt about that. But when I sit with youth who are living in disadvantaged neighborhoods, what they're telling me is that many of them are dealing with reintegration challenges. So those who've had some interaction with the criminal justice system, they're not able to get jobs because of their record. Mm-hmm. They're not able to go to school because of their record. So I understand the importance of that, but there are implications, there are impediments to youth being able to get jobs. The other issue is that youth are saying, we want mentors. When I take the research that's been done on a global scale relating to gun violence and the recommendations that came out of those research, and I look at the research that I've done across Canada with stakeholders, and they're pointing to the importance of youth being able to have mentors. I take this and I go to the young people and I say, tell me more about what this means to you. And they're saying, that's exactly what we've been saying for many years. We want people who care enough about us that will invest in us.
How does that let's go back to the days when you were in politics. You were representing a riding in Scarborough, Scarborough North. How does somebody who lives in the north end of Scarborough, who may come from a low-income family, who may have so many strikes against him or her in life, how do they find a mentor that can help?
Well, that's a very important point, because about the mentor and all that. Let me go to something way out, like the marijuana situation then. Many of these young people who have gotten their criminal records through that are maybe waiting for be pardoned or what have you. What the government has done, they put the cart before the horse. They make sure that all those who can invest, and see who are investing in it now, is those who are incarcerated, those individuals, are now the entrepreneurs in the business. But yet those young people who are looking for a role model and policies that to address them and say, listen, I was just caught with a couple of whatever it was, but it was illegal. But now it's legal, and they're still having their criminal record. As the professor said, well, what the access is to the jobs now. I have a criminal record. How can I move forward in my life? I have a criminal record. I can't even advance my education because of my criminal. Some universities may not want to take you, or maybe make an example out of one or two and said, okay, look what we have done. But that is the thing about the mentorship, and as a politician in the policy, that politicians have to start getting up and say, you're making policies that actually perpetuate the situation, and then the young people out there saying, are they protecting me or incarcerating me? Because I get 6 months or whatever the case would be, the judge had given them, but for the rest of their life, they've been carrying on their sentences. That has to be addressed. That's where the mentorship comes in, the deep mentorship of it all. And one gets rather frustrated, and no matter what report is written, underlining policies undermine it all, and we don't move forward.
As we look for solutions, JPEGs, and we consider that program you talked about, YES, you said funded $500,000 right now, they need 15. If they somehow found $15 million, how much of this problem goes away if that program's fully funded?
Well, I think that there are many parts of the strategy that address a lot of what we are talking about. Of course, you're never going to be able to eradicate youth violence. I think it's something that it's not just checking off a box. You're constantly working at it. There will always be more youth that need the help of the city and its residents. But we're talking about, providing stable mentorship. I think when you hear from youth who have been lucky, they found a teacher who has really encouraged them to pursue a talent or a skill that they have, or they have a basketball coach who's really pushed them. You need that opportunity to be available to more youth, and to be available to more youth on a full-time basis. And I think that's the difference in the funding gap that we're seeing, where you have programs like the program I mentioned about trauma and mental health in the community, that right now they're only able to run it in a certain number of neighborhoods over a certain number of weeks. They'd really like to expand that program to multiple neighborhoods for a longer period of time, so it extends beyond the summer. That's really important to these youth. One of the facilitators said that when he was finished, the youth said to him, "Are you coming back next week?" And that was difficult for him as well, to not be able to stay in that community and to continue challenging those youth to be their best selves.
Sorry, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was
Please.
thanks. I was just going to add, I think sometimes we fall into this trap of always looking to government for answers. And, when we talk about mentoring, there are so many people who have retired that have nothing to do, and they could mentor youth and actually learn that perspective about that community.
How do you make that connection?
Well, exactly. That's the big challenge. But I think that challenge needs to be made. And we need, as a city, we need to say, we can't just look to government and the $15 million programs.
Yeah.
That's not going to cut it. It will help. But as a society, we need to be there for each other. I can't tell you how many people will coach their own kids in baseball, hockey, or whatever, but could they find the time to mentor another child?
Okay, we've got to talk about this. We've got a few minutes to go here, and we discovered in quite appalling fashion over the last couple of weeks that youth and violence is not just a toxic mix in some of the more priority areas of the capital city. It can happen at the finest all-boys schools. And the St. Michael's College School scandal is really, has really hit home in a major way with that issue. What'd you think when you heard about this? These are not at-risk youth. These are youth from very supposedly fine families, right?
Yes, and I think with that you have, obviously I had sympathy for the victims, but I was always looking at the perpetrators and wondering what is going on there? What kind of pain and trauma are they dealing with? Because when you have 13, 14, 15-year-old boys assaulting somebody, brutally assaulting them, you kind of have to wonder what's happening with them within their households. Are there mental health issues that they're dealing with that haven't being addressed? And I guess, another factor would be just the whole sort of toxic masculinity and how we socialize young men where it's kind of that violence first. And so when I deal with a lot of young men who are ex-gang members, that's kind of what they say. When they were hurting, they didn't feel comfortable crying, they didn't feel comfortable going to a social worker, but they felt okay beating somebody up because that's what men do.
What did you think when you heard the St. Mike story?
To me, again, it comes on the radar because of the elitism where it was. Some of these trauma are happening all over in different levels. But again, St. Michael jumps up because we expect more of them all. Exactly what has just been said is that they're going through some mental problems too. They're not addressed. Many of those parents maybe not at home, and then they find their own outlets in their own way. And then they say that to be part of a certain club, just like the others who are having people taking them off out of the jails and said, I can mentor you. There are inside the schools that form this gang, and then you're a part of us, so they feel belong. So we have to look at that more than be shocked and say, oh, it is St. Michael's, put that away. There are young people there who need to be addressed. So I'm not at all shocked about St. Michael's. I'm just saying that maybe it comes to attention. It can happen at every level of our society.
And Neto, did you think that the people who were doing this, and admittedly we're into the realm of speculation now because you haven't had a chance to do the research or the first-hand interviews, did you think that these were young people themselves, the victims of trauma somehow, and that this was their acting out against somebody less powerful than them?
When you look at all forms of violence, at the root of them is an unmet need. For racialized youth, that is manifested through trauma. So whether it be negative interactions with the police, negative interactions within the school system, or the loss of friends and family members, that is what triggers their trauma. So we look at this very elitist all-boys school, and we wonder what kind of trauma could be at the base of their action. And I can't speculate on that, but young people have varying interactions in different systems at homes.
But we assume their trauma is not going to be as significant as the people that you deal with on a daily basis.
But trauma
That's what we
is
assume.
trauma.
Yes.
And it's
But
the
trauma
impact
is trauma. Okay.
of trauma is what we need to focus on, because the impact can have various manifestations.
Okay, I got 30 seconds left for the former counselor and officer. On this.
On this one, I'm at a loss, really. I would say that I would actually do believe in the trauma aspect, because I don't think this is an everyday occurrence at St. Mike's School. I don't think this is a hazing ritual. I think this was an anomaly, and the question is what caused that anomaly. But of course, I think it all comes back to the fact that there's social media and something's being acted out, it's being shared, and it is that power, the power of certain individuals over another one.
But it's only reached a level, that's all it is. The fact is that it was happening in a different level. You know, it happens as some of the military play about initiation, and we mask it in different ways. Maybe in St. Michael's and all that is happening at what we would want to call it a lower level, and then they just ratchet up a little bit more. It has been happening there all the time. It's happening all over initiation that goes on. We have to watch that.
But it's not all criminal, and it's not all vicious, and I think that's the difference.
And it surely was that time. As often is the case on this program, we are left with more questions than answers, but we are grateful you came in to discuss some of the questions and some of the answers behind really some very, very troubling statistics and stories. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.